For this week, I'm going to let you learn about the details of the Mexican American War and related episodes from the textbook for the Common Defense. It's just fine on those subjects, and the material is pretty straightforward. And I would rather spend the time discussing the sectional controversy, which is to say, the fateful years between 1848 and 1860 that saw the disruption of American democracy and the beginning of the American Civil War. This is a war that killed over 800,000 Americans. We now think that would be about 3% of the American population, close to 10% of the male population of military age. It was a catastrophe. And you can't really understand the American Civil War without understanding what people saw as being at stake, and also how polarized the political environment had become during the 1850s and leading up until 1860. And so I'm going to spend a lot of time drilling down on this. In the nature of the case, I'm going to be talking about politics, and not just the politics of the 1850s, but the politics of the last 20 years or so, because to many political observers and pretty much every Civil War historian that I've talked to or had anything to do with, we are united in the opinion that American political culture has not been this toxic since the 1850s, and that the survival of the American democratic experience is in real jeopardy. That is an opinion that I could kind of hide behind and sort of keep part of the subtext of this week's lecture, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put my cards on the table. And in doing so, let me go ahead and tell you what my political perspective is, my political persuasion is. I was born a Democrat, basically. I came into that kind of family. My father, my brother, my sister eventually moved over to the Republican Party, but I stayed with the Democratic Party. People don't always stay with a party or don't become part of a political party on the basis of what the party believes necessarily. They have a loyalty to the party that sort of transcends the policy positions, its policy positions, and that's been kind of the case with me. If you were to ask me my position on many issues, they would be akin to that of a good many Republicans that I know, and there is a kind of a sort of a branch of the Republican Party with which I'm in pretty good sympathy. And in fact, I listen to a fair amount of Republican podcasts, actually, not of the sort of the MAGA, make America Great Again variety, but of the sort of the traditionally conservative brand of the Republican Party that now finds itself challenged by the phenomenon of Donald Trump and now his successors in the upcoming presidential debate. So that's where I am politically. I think too, before we go on, the price of admission a lot of times in discussions of politics, if you want to have a discussion with someone about politics, is to kind of sort of talk in terms of the sort of moral equivalence between the two parties, so that if someone goes after some extremists on the left-hand side, another person will simply counter by saying, well, there's a similar person or similar phenomenon on the right-hand side, back and forth, back and forth. I don't believe in that kind of in that approach to things, and I don't agree really with the idea of the idea of a moral equivalence. Anyway, I just sort of said it. It's not that I think that the two parties are not morally equivalent or anything like that. I just set that aside. What I want to say is that at this point, according to most observers, and this is a bipartisan sentiment, the Republican Party is at a different place institutionally than the Democratic Party is, and this was reflected in the recent election of the Speaker of the House. It was now Kevin McCarthy of the Republican Party. Ordinarily, when a party takes the majority in the House of Representatives, the leader of that party is elected Speaker of the House on the first ballot, and there's no problem with that. As I think most of you know, when it came to the election of the Speaker of the House this time, it required 15 ballots for Representative Kevin McCarthy to be elected Speaker. That's because the support within his own party was lacking. On the Democratic side, every single Democratic congressperson voted for the Democratic minority leader time after time after time of time in lockstep. So that should give you an idea that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are in two different positions institutionally. By way of comparison with the 1850s, what you'll discover is that by 1860, it was the Democratic Party that had divided, really fatally divided, because of the tensions of the 1850s and the political currents that sort of swirled around and broke the Democratic Party as the last national institution in the country. And it was really the breaking of the Democratic Party in 1860 that made the American Civil War not an inevitability. Historians don't like to deal in inevitabilities, but a high probability. Now, what is behind me is the engine house at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, in 1860 or 1859 is what I'm interested in. It was part of Virginia. And as we're going to see later on in this lecture, in October 1859, John Brown, an abolitionist, freedom fighter, terrorist, revolutionary, however you want to characterize him, came down to Harper's Ferry with over a dozen followers and attempted to seize the federal arsenal that was in Harper's Ferry, which is to say, where the U.S. Army had stored a great deal of weapons. It was going to seize the arsenal. It was going to pass out weapons to enslaved Americans. It was going to foment a slave insurrection on a scale exponentially larger than anything Nat Turner attempted to accomplish 28 years before in 1831. That raid quickly became a cropper. And as we're going to see, Virginia militia arrived before John Brown's followers really did much of anything. John Brown and his followers took refuge in this engine house behind me. It's also called John Brown's Fort. And this engine house was stormed by a contingent of U.S. Marines that killed a number of Brown's followers, wounded Brown, and took him captive. I picked the engine house because it conveys a sense of just how violent American political life became during the 1850s. And that toxicity and the translation of a toxic rhetoric into real violence is a primary dynamic of the 1850s. And if you want an explanation for why the Civil War becomes so bloody, it is the political environment of the 1850s that helps to explain it.